So yeah, I do think it changes us permanently. One of the things I've written in a blog that I wrote to help counsellors with children work more effectively with clients without children was that childlessness changes us as profoundly and permanently as being a parent changes people. That we are not the same people we were before becoming childless. Because I think that's a common misconception, that we're still living the lives that we led in our 20s. But really not. We are different people. Our relationships are going to be different. And we need to find a way around that.
Welcome to The Full Stop, a podcast by the Childless Not By Choice, their cheerleaders and allies. The Full Stop podcast is hosted by Sarah Lawrence, Berenice Howard-Smith and me, Michael Hughes. And we explore themes that make up the childless identity. And we hope that with all our guests, you'll find information, inspiration, and if appropriate, find your space in the childless community. Now please remember that the thoughts expressed by our guests are their own and not necessarily those of the podcast hosts. Now this episode, we dive into the experience of being in a childless couple with the multifaceted and brilliant Muriel Whale.
Good morning, Muriel. Welcome to The Full Stop again. Returning.
Good morning, everyone.
It's lovely to have you with us. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience for people that don't know you, which I'm sure isn't very many people? Introduce yourself.
I will do so. My name's Muriel Whale. It's 10 years this month since my journey towards being a parent ended. So that's an interesting time to reflect back on everything that's happened in the last 10 years. And, a lot has happened in the last 10 years. I was already a counsellor before that point, but in 2019, I pivoted my counselling practice. So I work almost entirely with individuals and people in relationships who are childless, not by choice. There are other groups that I work with, but working with childless people is by far the biggest group in my client practice. And I also, in the last 10 years, I've become a novelist and I've trained as a celebrant. So there's been a lot happening since my journey ended. And yeah, it's been an exciting and eventful and not always easy 10 years, as I'm sure people listening to this will imagine. There's a lot of processing that has to go on when we have to turn and face the reality that we're going to be permanently childless. And yes, I've made lots of changes to try and get my life into a place that works well for me. And that's been both interesting, exciting and difficult as I've gone along. So yes, just a brief introduction to me, but I'd say really happy to answer any questions.
Could I just butt in and just say that Mary has a very good reputation in the childless men's group on Facebook. Just thought I'd put that in there for you, Mary.
Oh, thanks, Michael. I was really pleased earlier this year to meet Dr. Robin Hadley, and he came to my hometown, Lewis, to do a talk about the experience of being a childless man and his research into childless men's experiences. And we had a coffee afterwards, and it was really great to meet him and talk more about his work. I'd met him before online, but it was lovely to meet him face to face. And the work that he's done for childless men, I think, is absolutely brilliant. So a big shout out to Dr. Robin Hadley.
Big shout out. Yay. I love those connections. I love how that happens.
I just saw a poster in a pub in Lewis saying that Dr. Robin Hadley was coming to Lewis, and I was like, right. And actually the talk that he did was really well attended, and most of the people in the audience were men. So I think that was a really positive.
Really cool.
Yeah, really well attended talk, and probably 3/4 men in the audience, I would say, having a space to listen to someone talk about the experiences of childless men. They're really good evening.
Fabulous. That's really good to hear, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, yeah. Because I think that's always one of those difficult areas of getting people to turn up to a talk.
Yeah.
Particularly about something like that, but it's very meaningful and very important in terms of lived experiences, but also allyship as well.
Yeah.
Helping others out. Yeah. So today's podcast is about partnerships and childlessness. And by partnerships, we mean personal partnerships, as opposed to partnerships with businesses or anything like that, but personal partnerships as well. And how childlessness fits in with partnerships and how relationships can change. And I was having a little look on the internet about this, as one does, a little bit of consulting Google and also AI, and it struck me that there was that area of discomfort that other people have is to kind of to override, I think, some of the challenges that childlessness brings, because it's better to do that and to say, oh well, it brings people closer together, is a popular narrative, I think, that seems to come up a lot, I think, in online and in other communities where they may not experience childlessness. And I wonder just how true that might be. Does it bring people closer together?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I guess I can reflect today on my own experience as somebody who's been childless, who's been a childless step parent, which is a whole other area. So I was in a relationship with somebody as a childless step parent, and our relationship broke down because we tried to have children together and it didn't work. And my partner already had adult children. And so in that regard, obviously it didn't bring us closer together. It was the thing that ended our relationship. So it doesn't always bring people closer together. And also, I think it's really important to think about what are the micro experiences that people might have, because saying that childlessness might bring a couple or people in a relationship closer together. Yes, in some ways it might. In other ways, it might push people apart. And these experiences can be happening at the same time in the same relationship. So I think it's worth diving into the micro rather than making generalizations. One of the things that we learn very early on as a counsellor, it was on the first weekend of my training course, actually, was that no two people, even if on the surface they've had the same experience, will actually have the same experience. So two people who are both childless and have both gone through an almost identical journey will not have had the same experience because, again, of the micro level. So I think it's really important to dive into the micro level and all those little adjustments that happen when you're facing a change in your relationship. And it is a change because we're encouraged very much in the Western world, and I know less about other cultures, that life goes on in that you get training of some sort, you get a job, you meet somebody, you form a permanent connection with that person, and then the next step is deciding to have children together. And that's how we're encouraged to see life going. That's the kind of dominant story. So when we face a life change and that isn't happening, or it's proving really difficult, it's proving really hard to have children, then that puts us onto a different path in a way, an unfamiliar path, a path that's very different to the path that many of the people around us are on. And I think that in relationship, navigating that can bring us closer in some ways, can push us apart in others, and everything in between those 2 points, because they're just 2 points on a spectrum, and there's so much living that goes on in between. So yes, not an easy one to say yes or no to answer that question, really. And I think that's the thing that we should all, or we can all choose to bear in mind, is that yes and no answers are very broad and very, very binary, and there's so much more in between for us to explore. And in counselling, that's very much what I'm doing when I work with people in relationships, is what's actually the landscape? What landscape are we actually in? Let's be really honest and brave about talking about that.
I love that. I think you're so right. I think we can't all say that we've had exactly the same experience of childlessness. And I think I think of my own experience, and actually childlessness has become a bit of a squeaky third wheel in the relationship. Not that you sort of zoom apart, but it's almost like an elephant in the relationship, because from my experience, I've been devastated by my childlessness, and it has fundamentally changed me, changed my life, changed what I do as an occupation. And for my partner, I don't think it was quite so devastating. It's hit him differently, and I think that difference that can really cause both a sort of a coming together over that in the initial stages, but also a rupture.
Yeah.
And actually, that is very difficult to navigate when you're having such different and difficult experiences in coupledom, isn't it, in your relationship?
Yeah, because these ruptures, as they were with my ex, can be permanent ruptures, in which case trying to find, and that can happen in clients coming to counselling, they might be facing a permanent rupture in their relationship, in which case helping them to move forward with dignity into a separation is an important way to work. But sometimes those ruptures are not permanent ruptures, that the people in relationship really want to stay together. So the work that we can do in counselling with those ruptures that are key but not permanent, or not intended to be permanent, is really important. Because as you say, if we, again, this is only my opinion, if we don't explore them and we don't dig into them, it can be that permanent squeaky third wheel that's always there, but sometimes unacknowledged. So sometimes, going into counselling means a willingness to have really difficult conversations, but to have somebody else there to have those conversations with, another person in the room who's not part of it. So somebody with a bit of distance and a bit of perspective who can really help those people in the relationship. And I say people rather than couple, because relationships can be made up of more than two people, to really find their way to understanding each other better. And in a non-judgmental way, like no one's experience of childlessness is any more important than anybody else's. So finding their way back to understanding each other without saying my experience is worse than yours, more important than yours, more difficult than yours, just recognising what those experiences are and really increasing the empathy between the people in the relationship can have a really key impact. And I wish I'd been able to do that a bit more with my ex. I still think the journey would have ended the way it did. I still think we would have separated. But I think if we'd been able to understand each other a bit more, I think we'd have found the whole process a lot easier. So I think helping people in relationships to understand the path that they're on and to be able to share that understanding with the other people in the relationship, I think is really key, because I think there's nothing more painful than being unseen and unheard within a relationship, and bringing people together to have those difficult conversations can make a big difference to really increase the empathy in the room.
It can be such a big kind of bit, can't it, as well? I think, and I was just thinking about how people you change, you form a partnership with somebody perhaps prior to childlessness, and they are one person. And I'm very much thinking of my experiences here. I was a different person.
Yeah.
So the relationship has to almost adjust somehow around the squeaky wheel. And I love that analogy, because I think it's very true. My experiences, I think, echo very much yours, Sarah, in that my partner is very children would have been a bonus, but they weren't the fundamental kind of reason for marriage. For me, it wasn't the fundamental reason for marriage. I don't know that we probably would have gotten married had it not been for other pressures upon us at the time, that now I would not have listened to. And again, that's kind of like a measure of change, I think, as well in me, and kind of what I'm prepared to put up with. And I think values as well, and society values, but fundamentally have completely changed from the person that I was before to them.
Yeah, I would agree that, who we are really changes in so many ways, that we can feel unrecognisable even to ourselves. sometimes, and certainly to other people. So almost we have to go on a journey of getting to know ourselves again, and then helping the key people in our relationship in getting to know us again and them. So yeah, I do think it changes us permanently. One of the things I've written in a blog that I wrote to help counsellors with children work more effectively with clients without children was that childlessness changes us as profoundly and permanently as being a parent changes people. That we are not the same people we were before becoming childless. Because I think that's a common misconception, that we're still living the lives that we led in our 20s. But we're really not. We are different people. Our relationships are going to be different. And we need to find a way around that. And again, to have those really open, brave, often quite difficult conversations about getting to know each other again. And knowing that our needs might change. Our needs in so many ways could change. Our needs for communication, our needs for physical contact. I think, it's hard to talk about sex, but that is one of the things that can change in a relationship after childlessness or during that journey towards having children when it's not going very well. And I know that lots of people find that a difficult conversation to have. Talking about sex is not an easy thing to do. And in relationship therapy, it's something that we do talk about.
Yeah.
Even if it's hard. Not if the couple are completely unwilling, but I'll always flag it up at the beginning and say this is something that we can talk about if we need to, so that people in relationships know that I'm willing to talk about it. Because that's something that can really change, and it's not the only thing. So having really difficult but open conversations about what we need now and who we are now can be really key.
Yeah,
100%. Michael, you were going to ask something.
Yeah.
I was going to circle back to what you were talking about, Mariel, about diving deeper. And I think back to when Vicky and I were in the throes of the really dirty, griefy stage, and we were just on totally different planets. And she'll tell you that she felt so alone because of the way she was dealing with it, and the way that I was dealing with it was a totally different way. And she felt alone because she thought I wasn't feeling anything, which wasn't true. Yeah. But of course, we were talking about that stuff. But we had the benefit of seeing a really good therapist. And when people say to me, what was it like? I say, think about it like a translator. And so they will help you understand and help your partner understand where you're both coming from, because sometimes you just need someone in there to interpret it a little bit for you.
Yeah.
And that worked really, really well for us.
I love the idea of translator. Of needing a translator.
That's what it felt like. That's what it felt like. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you were saying
and so it's put us on a really good stead. But having been exposed to a number of other, and I'll speak for blokes because that's the circles that I move in. I can't say that the rest of them have had that. There's a lot of resistance to that, for the best way of explaining it.
Resistance to going into that situation where you're going to have those conversations, maybe with a counsellor to support that. But is that where you think the resistance can be? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think people can be scared of what's going to happen? What will come up that I don't know about? What's my partner going to say that could be really painful or difficult or unknown? And sometimes it's easier not to go into the unknown and not to face what's happening, because we don't know what it's going to lead to. We don't know what our partner or partners might say. And I wonder if that's something that you think people particularly men might be
I-
afraid of,
I would-
Michael, is what's going to be said. Might cope with.
Yeah. I think there is definitely an element of that, but there's also an element, and I experienced this. There's an element of I should be able to sort this out. I should be able to fix this.
Yeah.
And you bluff yourself thinking that you could. But there, I mean, yeah, I was bluffing myself. I couldn't.
Yeah.
I think sometimes as well, there's a thing that what conversations may come up, what one might learn about the person that we've invested in, and a relationship we've invested in so much. But I wonder sometimes if those conversations are held in a better space than perhaps some of the unwitting words that can be used. I certainly know from my experiences, both in the relationship with my husband now, but also in a past relationship, that sometimes the words that can come out, if they're not said in a way that with context, they can be very, very hurtful, and that then starts to chip away at something. The stable ground that one was once on becomes very, very unstable. And I sometimes think that in counselling, and I was in my experiences of counselling have not been always been positive, but have lately very much been a very positive thing. It's just trying to find the right person and the right fit, I think, is so critical. But yeah, sometimes I think in relationships when childlessness sits there and the experiences are so different and so individual, my thing is that when you speak to one childless person, you speak to one childless person. In the way that, but I'd never think that we ever claim to be a voice for everybody. We're certainly not as the full stop. It's kind of lived experiences and things. But I think that in that difference and that space and the differences, there can be lots of kind of hurtful language can be used when we don't necessarily know the vocabulary ourselves. I think it's always this struggle. We talked briefly about Story House earlier before when we first joined us, and again a conversation that came up there was around, well, childless, is it really less, and child free, does that free less? Are they the right words here? Is that the right language? What's the language? But when you're having an argument or you're having you're having a falling out, a collapsing of a relationship, whether that's a permanent one or whether it's a brief kind of blip or it's a reoccurring thing, which I think it can be for many people, then we can say some hurtful things.
Yeah.
In counselling, there is someone there to support that and to unravel it. And I think that's where that safe space, I think, comes in, where the third person can really help, I think, in that.
Yeah. I certainly, I'd really like to come back to Michael's point about asking for help it can equal failure, but so I'm just going to park that to come back to it. But certainly, I think what you're saying, Berenice, about having that helpful third person there. And one of the things I often find myself saying when I'm working with relationships is, so it sounds like what you're saying is, and then I'll paraphrase as accurately as I can what I think person A is saying. Person B, what does that feel like for you? Or what does that bring up for you? So by being there, I'm receiving both stories, both versions. I'm holding them both, and I'm reflecting them back to the people in the room, and then asking them what that's like for them and what they have heard. So what do you hear, person A? So person B, what do you hear person A saying? Person A, is that what you were actually saying? There's a lot of receiving it, saying something empathic about it, hopefully accurately, and then finding out what that's like for the other person. So in a way, it's being a conduit for that communication, and hopefully preventing what I think you're talking about, Berenice, where people can say really hurtful things that are on the surface of their experience. And obviously what other people in the relationship can't see is what's beneath the surface of the water. what's on that. If we're thinking about the commonly used metaphor of an iceberg, we can only see the top bit pointing out of the water. We can't see what's beneath the iceberg. But sometimes seeing what's beneath the iceberg can really help us understand someone's behaviour and understand the words that they're using. And I think that when people in relationships experience childlessness, they can be on very different places on their own road. There can be two timelines running alongside each other, at least two, sometimes more. But each person's on their own timeline, and they're not definitely going to meet. So helping the people in that relationship understand the timeline that the other person is on, which could be very different, understand what's beneath the iceberg. So many things can influence that. What we learned in our families of origin, any traumatic experiences that we had, either growing up or as adults, that our partner maybe does or doesn't know about. What we think is happening to our role as a childless person, what's happening to our purpose as a childless person. And I think coming back to Michael's point, there can be so much difference in the room when you're working with people in relationship who've experienced childlessness. And working with that difference is really key. What does it mean to the people in the room? It's going to mean really different things. There can be gender differences. It can absolutely mean different things to men as to women. And there are other genders as well, which are important to bring into the mix. Because we're all socialised differently. And really bringing that in, those differences, and helping those differences to be more understood, I think is really key. And if we come out of the counselling process and the people in the room understand each other better and understand what's beneath the iceberg and understand the different experiences people have had of being parented, of living in a world where pronatalism is everywhere, then hopefully that in itself will be a positive outcome, is that the level of understanding will be really increased, and the level of knowing that we're not going to go through milestones at the same pace. We're on completely different timings, and those differences in timings can make it really difficult for people to communicate, because they might think, well, so and so is not upset at all and I'm really upset. They obviously just don't care about it, but they're on a different timing to the other. And sometimes what happens is one person in a partnership can come into a place of healing where they're feeling better about things, and then the other person can fall apart because they've been holding on and being brave for sort of person A. And when person A gets a bit better, person B can often really fall apart because they've been hanging on. And I think that question about asking for help is saying that you haven't been able to sort it out yourself and feeling a failure. So you're going into the counselling with that huge feeling of being a failure. I'm a failure. I've failed at being a parent, and I've now failed at solving this problem by myself. So that weight of things that people bring into the counselling room with them, and unpacking that and bringing empathy to that and gently shining a light on it in a really gentle but brave way, can be a really important part of the work.
If the topic in this episode or any of our others chimes with you, you can get in touch with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn and Blue Sky, and we really appreciate your feedback. Childless Not By Choice listeners can carry on the conversation with us in our safe and inclusive space at the Full Stop online community. We are really proud that we are one of the very few childless spaces that welcomes men into the group. And for more details on how to join and to claim a free month's trial on us, please visit www.thefullstoppod.com. And we extend a huge thanks to the current members of our amazing online community. And it's because of them that we can keep the lights on for the podcast and look forward to giving back to the childless community as we grow.
I think that's a huge point, actually, that word failure. I mean, it doesn't matter what your journey is. For people that have gone through IVF, failure is such a big word in that process. Yeah. But it doesn't matter how you come to be childless. I think a lot of what I find both professionally and personally is the unsaids. because you haven't got a vocabulary other than the word failure. And I think that is such a heavy weight to bear. And initially for the partner that goes, okay, I'm going to grieve this immediately, while the strong one is kind of holding on to other things. But once that, in my case, that I started to heal, that was kind of when I noticed I was sort of looking around going, where the bloody hell are you? You know, it felt like I was doing it on my own, partly because I felt that I had failed. And then obviously my partner was like, well, there's a big F word here for me too, because I can't fix this. I think that's such a huge process.
Yeah, I agree with that terribly. I think it is that thing of, I think for us, that what I liked there that you pulled out was how one person can get better and the other one can then, they've been hanging on for so long. I think in my experience is that actually when I'm physically ill, I am more easy to care for. And when I'm not well in my mind and my mental health is affected, it's harder to pick up on that and harder for me to ask for help. And it's harder to fix, therefore it feels like a cyclone of kind of, it is failure on failure on failure. And I think you're right there, Sarah, picking up on that word failure, particularly in the context of IVF and childlessness in general, but I think in IVF it's a really, really a word that I try very hard to avoid using because it comes with an awfully big added weight to it. But it's that I kept thinking of like those little houses where you've got the man and the woman in the little wooden house when it rains and they've got the thing. I feel like it's kind of like that, kind of out, I'm back in again now and I don't want to go out there again, and someone else has to do that kind of that world. You deal with world, because I can't do that, and it's really hard, I think, when also you've been hanging on and maybe you're feeling better because you've had help, to then have to support somebody else who's been through something that's the same but different, and not having the tools to do that. I think it's so important to ask for help in those situations. Having actually with the disclaimer that I'm actually really crap at that, everyone. I really don't ask for help very easily, as these two will attest. Anyone else who knows me, you're not alone on that one, everyone.
It's a really hard thing to do because when we've experienced something incredibly difficult and felt that big capital F failure of not being able to conceive, for example, and not always had support and help around us, why on earth would we want to ask for help again? We can have a belief it's better just to carry on my own and then I won't be disappointed.
In my experience, help only leads to kind of poking, prodding, blood tests and things I don't like. So it's taken a long while to reframe, what help means as much as the word failure. There's a lot of, again, cycling back to language. It's one of my favourite topics, but anyway.
Yes. I think language is key. And retelling our stories with more compassion. I think, and that thing about failure, one of the things I think people can particularly feel is my body has failed me, but I can only live in this body. This is all I have. So I think sometimes after we've experienced childlessness that's related to the body, that's related to perhaps difficulties, and I think this can be for both men and women and everything in between, we can sometimes not be very nice to our bodies. We can eat too much, not eat enough, not exercise, not look after ourselves in so many ways, almost like we're trying to punish the thing in which we live for not being able to have given us the children that we longed for. And sometimes coming back into a good relationship with our bodies, both separately and together, can make a big difference. And I think the other thing I really wanted to pick up on was what you said, Berenice, about same and different. We're in relationship with somebody or some other people. It's a really key relationship. It's our key romantic and partnership of our lives. Some of what we've experienced is the same. Some of it is different. And we can't always see that. We're in the dark. We're in the dark often with our own feelings and with what our partner might be going through. And that can be so hard. And the language, and I think, Berenice, you picked up on language, which I know is one of your passions. And we can often use language about ourselves and about other people that's really hurtful, really unempathic, really lacking in compassion, really harsh, really angry. We can be very angry with ourselves. We can be very angry with other people. We can feel like somebody else has let us down. Sometimes it's easier to locate the being let down in somebody else rather than in ourselves. So acknowledging that it's actually much more complex. It's not your fault or my fault. It's somewhere in between. And refining what help means. Help can often be something that we don't want anymore because we've had such negative experiences of it, because we've gone to people for help and experienced some of the bingos like, well, why don't you just adopt? Why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? So finding the right person to ask for help is really key. And, we know that we know in the childless community that solutions are not always there to be found. Sometimes there is no solution. There is nothing you can do about it. So, we can't go over the situation. We can't go under the situation. Sometimes we just have to go through it. But with our key relationship in our lives with our partner, we can be going through it in different times and in different ways. And it can be really hard to communicate with each other and use language that's helpful and honour the differences between us and allow them to be there. It can all be so difficult. It's a minefield. It can be an absolute minefield, which we're trying to walk over, avoid explosions, and live normal life at the same time, going to work, looking after pets or other family members, just getting on with our lives, spending time with our friends, many of whom will have children. We're trying to do all of this where there's a minefield in our relationship and we're having to step on eggshells with each other. It can be so difficult.
Yeah, I think that's so very, very true. And thank you for acknowledging that. And I also wanted just to just go back to what Michael had said about the loneliness as well. And I think it's something that isn't talked about enough, possibly even within the childless community. I'm going to argue that one a little bit too, controversially perhaps, is that childlessness, being a couple, doesn't mean that it's still, the loneliness has gone. And I think it's very, very true that I certainly have felt it, and I don't think I'm alone in that, feeling absolutely lonely, really gut-wrenchingly lonely, because it's the one place when you think, I have a home, I have somewhere to be, and I should, again, another word I'm not keen on, I should be grateful for this. But actually sometimes I've often thought, and I'll admit this and possibly offend a few people, I've often thought that sometimes life would be easier to navigate on my own because I know my boundaries. I don't have to carry the load sometimes of somebody else, because sometimes it's really hard, I think, to ask for help, but also for either of us to ask for help, because once we've navigated perhaps asking the difficulties of asking for help for ourselves, when we see that the relationship is at risk, but you can't necessarily say to somebody else, I think you also need help, and you've kind of been a bit kind of like a little bit reluctant to seek it yourself, but you can see that there is something at risk here and it needs intervention. I think that's a really hard thing to do, and it can be very isolating, I think, when one is struggling. And if you've got friends who've had kids, friends in different situations, maybe friends who've chosen not to have children, who do you talk to? And I think that can also add to the layers of difficulty. And I think making space for people within the childless community who are lonely in their relationships, I think, is really, really important, because often that can be the only place, I think, to have those conversations sometimes, until the point comes when, if that person, those people decide that they need some help from somewhere else. But just coming to terms with that, that might be controversial and offend a few people, but I certainly feel that that's my experiences, both personally, but also in some of the conversations I've had as well, to allow space for that.
I think it's difficult, because actually that is quite a taboo to admit, isn't it? That actually, while you're going through it and the other person is trying to be really strong for you, that actually you feel lonely, like you're doing it on your own. And I think it impacts all sorts of different parts of your relationship, so your relationship self, relationship to your body, your want or your need to have sex, to have intimacy with that other person. I think the ripple effect isn't really addressed because you're so kind of in it and thinking, right, I'm doing this on my own. What does that mean? And I think that in itself can be lots of little ruptures in that relationship.
Do you think that adds to like a sense of weakness, Sarah? Is there kind of, if the other person is being stronger, does that account to kind of strength and weakness, and that the person who isn't doing perhaps quite so well can feel weak when they've already, there's a feeling around that uncomfortableness for me around the word weakness there.
Yeah, I don't like the word weak.
No.
Got a real ick as you said it.
Yeah, I know, but it's kind of like, yeah, I'm okay and I'm all right, and you're just a little bit more, I don't know,
Yeah.
feeble because you're not all right. That society perception of mental health, I think, maybe comes to bear there. Of, are you over it yet?
No, but I think that is, oh gosh, there's so many unsaids in all of this, isn't it? It's like the pass the parcel where you take another layer off and there's
Yeah.
another layer of crap.
We haven't even got onto sex properly yet. But
No, I
there's
think
a lot, isn't there?
it's so difficult, isn't it? Because I'm sort of talking to Michael's point, I guess, about men and being able to ask for help. I think there is this unsaid around perceptions around, well, if you've got to go and see a counsellor, then that must mean that there's something, quote unquote, there's something wrong with you. You can't sort yourself out. I know when I first went to therapy, I was covered in shame. I was like, I can't believe I've got to go and talk to somebody. And it wasn't a good experience, but I can't believe I've got to go and talk to somebody about this. And what I hadn't realised at the time was the experiences I was going through had actually uncovered loads and loads of traumas and things that I hadn't dealt with, that I'd buried and I sort of pushed right down. And so I look back as a therapist, and I think a lot of my reactions were coloured by things that predated my childlessness. So my husband is not going to experience this the same way I did, and it took a lot of pass the parcel layers coming off for me to understand that he wouldn't be able to do it the way I was doing it.
So I think that difference is key, acknowledging the different lives we've had up until the moment where we became childless, the different ways we're processing it, the different feelings and thoughts we have about it, the different societal status or societal impact, how differently we can be seen by the rest of society, how scared some of us can be about what's in that parcel. Oh my God, I don't want to unwrap that parcel. There's not going to be a good prize in the middle. That fear that unwrapping it's going to lead to the relationship rupturing, perhaps permanently. So really acknowledging, what we're bringing into the room, the differences between the people in that relationship, and that those differences are okay. They can be scary, but they're okay. And I think the other thing that I think is a really big part of it, we've touched on it a couple of times, is what can happen to sex and intimacy in relationships after childlessness, because it can be a really big thing. During IVF, sex can become quite mechanized. Like, we have to have it at a certain date, at a certain time. We have to plan it. And it can become really divorced from love, intimacy, connection. It can become a process that is only valued if it's going to lead to conception. And rediscovering sex after childlessness, knowing that there's no chance of it leading to conception, but finding the value in it anyway, can be a really important part of the journey. And sometimes it's something you have to travel very slowly and very carefully with, because again, it means so many different things to so many different people. And once it's been labelled as having a function of making children or leading to conception, and that's not happening and it's not going to happen, you need to, in some ways, think about as a couple, how are we going to get back into this? Now, it doesn't mean that anymore. How are we going to find our way back into sex? What's that going to look like? It's probably going to look different. And it can be a really hard topic. We're not always socialised into thinking it's okay to talk about sex. And I also, coming back to what you were saying, Berenice, hard conversations about loneliness, hard conversations about where are we with our partners. We can feel like we're entirely on our own. And yes, perhaps it would feel easier in those places to say, do you know what? I'm just throwing my hands up in the air. I'd rather be by myself. I'd rather deal with this by myself because I've only got my own thoughts and feelings to deal with and not somebody else's. So yeah, having these difficult conversations about loneliness, about connection, about reconnection, I think are really, really important, but they're not easy conversations to have. And I think it's really great that as part of this discussion, we're touching on difficult issues of loneliness, issues of connection. You know, they're so difficult to have, and I think they're so key. So yeah, you know, well done to all of you for being willing to talk about difficult things. It's not easy to do.
Thank you. I think it is important. I think just the experiences that we've got. If someone's listening and they are interested in wanting to seek counselling, couples counselling, how does that process work? Could you talk us through what the steps are, just in case somebody would like help and they're a bit nervous about what to do next?
Yeah, I think it's important to check with all counselling that the counsellor has got some kind of qualification. I often say to clients that that one of the key determinants of success in counselling is the relationship between the client or clients and the counsellor, more than what training the counsellor has done. And there are lots of different kinds of training, but it's really important that the counsellor has had some training. So whether it's person-centred, psychodynamic, transactional analysis, and there are many other ways that you can train to be a counsellor, check that they've had some training. Check that they've got a qualification and that they're registered with a ethical body, like in the UK, like the BACP or the NCPS. There's lots of different ways you can register. So that's a bottom line. And in terms of going to find counselling for you in your relationship, again, I would say the same thing applies. Has this person that you're thinking of going to see done some training in working with couples? Have they perhaps, if sex is an issue for you, have they got psychosexual training? Training does matter. And we do it for a reason. So when I wanted to broaden my practice to include working with people in relationship, I did a training course. I didn't have to necessarily, but I chose to because it felt like the right thing to do, because I was going to be working with two people or perhaps more than two people rather than one person. And that's a big difference, because those people that you're working with, as we've already touched on, are bringing their own worlds with them. And it's really important that the counsellor is able to work with often contrasting or opposite experiences in their clients, is able to work with conflict, is able to work with anger and isn't scared of working with anger, is able to work with simple things like, it sounds simple, but it isn't really, like people shouting. And what will, an interesting question to ask your counsellor is, what will you do if we have a row in the session and we're screaming at each other and we're really angry and really frustrated? It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel held. How are you going to hold that? So these are all important questions, and not to be scared to ask these questions because they're really big questions. And so finding a couple counsellor in many ways is like finding a counsellor for you as an individual. It's using things like directories. It's asking around if you feel comfortable to ask around. Personal recommendations are often the best way, but there are lots of ways. But they're not being afraid to ask questions to make sure that person's the right person for you. And lots of counsellors will offer like a free conversation, like a free 20-minute phone call, where you can get a sense of who that person is. Because again, the relationship between you and the counsellor is really key. And when there's two of you or more going for counselling, it's important to check that both of you are happy with that counsellor. So just lots of things there to think about. And there are ways of finding people, certainly in the UK, through directories. There's lots of directories out there. There's a pink directory for LGBTQ plus people. There's the counselling directory. I think the BACP has their own directory. That's the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, which is a bit of a mouthful. And so lots of ways out there to find people. There's organisations of neurodivergent counsellors. So if somebody in the relationship has a neurodivergence and would rather work with somebody who's got personal and professional experience of that. So in a way, there are probably too many ways to find counsellors, which might mean that asking around, if you feel comfortable to do so, can be a helpful thing to do. But also, we don't always want to admit to our friends and our connections that we're having problems in our relationship. I think that comes back to what you were saying, Berenice, about feeling lonely, feeling a failure. We don't always want to say to our friends, things aren't going very well in our relationship. That can be a really difficult thing to do as well. And I can see that Berenice is popping some of the links in the chat, which is great.
One of the things that we found, Muriel, was also with the therapy, it ebbs and flows. So there are times when I would be looking forward to going, and Vicky's going, I just can't. I just can't face it. And then that would swap. And so just thought I'd bring that in as well. That's okay.
Yes, absolutely.
There's also something else that I think is unique to the childless community in this. In when we talk about couples, so one of the things you see a lot of is people developing, great amounts of empathy in the childless space because of, I don't need to explain to you guys why. But I've got a question from someone who has said, how do I stop feeling guilty about being in a couple when I have so many single friends that I have in our space? That I think is obviously something that I think is very unique to the childless community.
I think that's a really good question, and I think one of the when we talk about difference, one of the things we need to perhaps think about acknowledging is the differences within our community. So, for example, you might think of another community which is seen as being quite homogenous in many ways, the LGBTQIA plus community. People might say, they're all the same because they're all queer. So, but actually, that couldn't be further from the truth. There's so much difference within that community, and I think we need to acknowledge the difference within the childless community as well, and how those differences can sometimes lead to us not feeling very empathic with each other. So I would always really advocate, if possible, the importance of listening. So really being willing to listen. So if you're this childless person in a couple feeling guilty about your childless friend who's single, and maybe you don't feel you can talk about the difficulties you're having in your couple relationship because that person doesn't have a partner and would really like one. I think the first step would be to really listen as openly as you can to your childless single friend, acknowledging that there are challenges that they have which you don't know about, and being really willing and happy and able to listen to them as non-judgmentally and non-defensively as possible, and then to let them, if they want to, listen to you and listen to what's going on for you. Obviously, as a counsellor, I'm going to emphasise the benefits of listening because it's a skill that we're really not great at sometimes. There's that saying, isn't there, that we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. But it's really hard to do because sometimes we're really longing to share what's in us. I remember the first time I went to a childless meetup, a childless social meetup, which was probably in like 2011 or 2012 or something, so talking a long time ago. And I'd never met another childless person. I was so desperate to talk about what was going on for me that I think I started talking for about half an hour and didn't stop. And I really felt for the person who listened to me beautifully. This other person in the group listened to me really beautifully. I felt felt quite bad afterwards because I was like, I've literally just talked about myself for half an hour. But I was desperate. I had no one else to talk to, and she was great. And I feel very grateful and she gave me some really good advice later on as well, which I also feel very grateful for. So, if you're out there, hi, thank you. I still think about you. So yeah, really being able to listen and recognizing the differences between us, and not being dismissive of those differences. Saying, yeah, within the childless community, we have many paths, we have many experiences, we have many differences. How open can we be to each other?
Yeah, I think that's really, really lovely advice as well. And it's a very rare thing, isn't it? Full listening. I know that in my well-being and my coaching training, one of the things that I think everyone had struggled with was actually the full listening, the really engaging in what is not being said as well. And I think a lot of that can be missed. We're not taught that. And I think in a world where we are easily distracted, is it 8 seconds or something like that? I think it's reduced now. We don't listen as much as perhaps we used to do. And I think it's very easy to get quite defensive and get a little bit on the back foot, or feel that we have to go in automatically into that bit where we have to defend what we are or who we are and how we show up, when actually sometimes it's conversation. And I think sometimes that simply is the way that society can sometimes present itself to us, and we fall into those traps. Whereas coming back to what you said about within our community, childlessness is such a very unique space to be. It's a very different space. I think it's a very empathetic space, but it's very different. And it's almost, sometimes I find that when I'm doing my stuff, and I'm going to cycle back to Story House, is that coming away from Story House and then transitioning back to the real world is actually quite hard, because you've been in a space that's been really safe and lovely, and listened to, but the outside world is a very, very harsh contrast, because people are very dismissive, and we can fall back into those behavior traps, I think, very, very quickly. So I think taking a breath and going, am I actually fully listening? And if you're not, then it's okay to say, look, this isn't the right time for me to talk about this. Catch up later, I think, is okay too. It's kind of respectful, I think, as well, if there's something else going on with this.
I think it's lovely to be able to say to a friend or a colleague or somebody we know, I've got something that's really difficult, I'd really like to talk about it. Are you in a space where you can hear it just now?
Yeah.
Just to check in with them before we just launch straight into whatever it is that we want to talk about. And I think that's really important. And I also think that when we're listening to somebody, I think we've all comes back to this iceberg in a way. On the surface, somebody can be saying, I'm fine, I'm absolutely fine. But we look at their face, and their face is not fine. I think you were picking up on that, Berenice, that listening is not just to the words that people are saying, because they can often be a smokescreen because of all the things we've talked about, fear of failure, fear of judgment. But we can look at somebody and go, you're saying you're fine, but I wonder if you really are. You may not want to talk about it now, but if you ever did want to talk about why you're not feeling fine, I'd be happy to listen.
It reminds me of the Not About the Nail, which is one of my kind of those things I go back to with it's a video on YouTube about Not About the Nail, and it's the conversation between a couple, and she has a nail here, and he said, but if you just took out the nail, it's not about the nail. And it's about so many other things. Frequently, I will confess that yesterday was I went to bed very, very, very tired, because I think I'd done all of the housework yesterday on top of kind of admin stuff for the full stop and other things I had to do. And one of the things that my other half said to me was, well, I used to do the housework when you were in full-time work, and I'm still in full-time work. In fact, I'm doing more than I did before, because actually my life has changed, because I do things differently now because of childlessness. The full stop is another thing I do, but that's because of childlessness that I do it, because it means that much to me, and it's an important part of my recovery. It's not about that, and it's not necessarily about the housework. It's actually just, I need some more help to be able to do the things I need to do, because inherently it's also connected again back to childlessness. So much is fundamentally, it is like you said, that's the squeaky wheel. It's it is the housework, and it is that
Yeah.
stuff that needs to be done, but the house won't fall down because of dust. But actually there's this kind of like there's a level and a value, I think, in things, and also being seen and heard. So sometimes it's not the thing you're talking about, it's the other thing. And that's a really hard thing to unpack if you don't have counselling or coaching experience or haven't been in these spaces, which sometimes that can be in a little bit of an inequity in a relationship where someone has been through or knows those spaces or hangs out, as I have the privilege to do. I talk to lots of people within the therapy space a lot of the time, and I've learned things by osmosis, and I'm really I have a different experience, a different lived experience, I guess, in my recovery, I suppose, or my coming to terms with. There you go, my coming to terms with childlessness. We can inhabit different spaces as a result going forward too.
Yeah, because of all the experiences we've had up to date, and I love that analogy about the nail, and I've got a nice analogy about a ball. Which is when your partner or the person that you're talking to throws you a ball, metaphorically in conversation, says something, your job is to talk about the ball that your partner has just thrown you, not how you feel about it. So if I throw a conversational ball to my partner and I say, I'm feeling really frustrated today because I've done all the housework, and my partner then goes into a massive spiel about why they haven't been able to do it, they're not talking about the ball, they're talking about how they feel about the ball. But really, maybe what I want to hear is, before they do their story, which is also important, is, gosh, that sounds really frustrating for you, that sounds really hard for you. So one thing I would say when you're in a communication with somebody, whether it's a romantic partner or a family member or a friend, and they throw you a conversational ball, is talk about the ball before you talk about how you feel about the ball.
I love that. That kind of is something that kind of needs to be written down. Mariel says, as a quote, that's going on social media, because that is just. I mean, everything in this conversation has been so impactful, but that is again a really good. It's really, really helpful, because sometimes it is just those clues, isn't it? If we don't talk about the therapy or the analogies and all of those helpful things, then it's important to have those conversations, that we can learn from that too, which is why we just felt this episode was so important for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly other people.
Thank you. Well, it's been good to be part of it again.
Oh, it's fantastic. We do put onto our show notes all the time your details, because it's so important, I think, to have people that we know and we trust as well is important. So just acknowledging your presence is very welcome here.
Oh, well, it's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to bring my differences into the space and be met with all of your stories. And it's a privilege to hear people's stories here in this space where we're all talking together about our own life journeys, and it's also a real privilege in my work to hear people's stories, and to support those stories and support people in relationships to support each other's stories, because I think that's what it comes down to a lot of the time.
That's lovely. We always say it at the end of every podcast, but we genuinely mean it at this point, though I've touched on loneliness. Genuinely, hashtag you're not alone.
Yes.
Really, really aren't. I think in this situation or in any of the topics that we've covered on the podcast, but I think if you're in a couple and you're struggling, then you're not alone, and I hope this has helped, and I hope it's helped other people who are listening who might not be in a partnership to understand perhaps some of the differences as well, and some of the challenges that happen because of that too.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed catching up with Mariel as much as we did, and we'll leave all her details in the show notes. And if you want to support what we do, jump over to our website www.thefullstoppod.com, where you can donate via our Ko-fi link. But the best way would be to join our online community, where you can both support our work but also become part of what others are calling one of the best online spaces for support and community. And whilst over at the website, you can also sign up to our newsletter, check out the show notes and all our resources. And as always, it's important for us to let you know you are not alone.
I think this has been brilliant.
It's really
It's
good to
been a
see you,
really
Muriel.
Insightful conversation.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
really
it's
lovely
been
to see all of you. You know, it's really lovely to be a part of this conversation. The ongoing, you know, what you're all doing is you're facilitating ongoing conversations in the childless world, ongoing different conversations. And I popped in now to a few of these conversations and been part of them, and I always come out of them feeling really grateful that you, the three of you, are making spaces both in the podcast but also in your community, and the work that you do outside of that, making room for these stories, for these conversations, for the acknowledgement of difference. And it's lovely to periodically appear and feel part of it for an hour or so, you know, and to feel the kind of warmth in the space, because I feel like there's a lot of warmth in this space that you're creating, that that you three have
Thank you so
created.
much.
So it's lovely to pop in and feel the warmth for an hour.
Thank you.
We were going to do a new thing where we were going
Thank
to
you.
ask our guests to do a testimonial. I think you've just done it without us even needing to ask you. Thank you. We didn't have any problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's lovely to come in and be a part of this space, and these spaces are so important.
Thank you very much, Rael. That is just truly lovely. We're starting to realise that. I think it's taken probably all of us a bit longer to realise about sometimes the impact of what we do, and we're getting there with that. Not that responsibility. We always felt responsible for things, but it's nice to hear that, and we appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, all of you, for everything that you're doing in so many different spheres.
I'm going to have to come down to Lewis and have a coffee with you.
Yes. And Michael, you need to come.
I'll be there, don't you worry.
Sarah and Berenice, that's fairly easy, but you know,
Yeah.
it's not for you, but
2027. It might be 2027.
Yeah. Can I just mention M25, Mariel? But never mind.
Well,
but yeah,
I'm sure we can find a way. We can find a way.
There are trains. There are things.
We can always do it. We could do we could do some kind of finding a middle ground between the three of us geographically, and then Michael in 2027.
Yeah,
maybe getting to say hi to you in person.
I thought you were saying go to Thailand or something. We could all meet there. That middle ground.
I was say, where is the middle ground geographically? I think that was Uzbekistan or something.